Hello, everyone. My name is Trevoir Williams, and I'm a software engineer from Jamaica. And today we're going to be discussing web programming and technologies actions you can take today. So, after today's session, I hope that you are inspired to one, sharpen up those web development skills, and two, look into taking it as a career path and seriously as a business. So let us get into it. Our agenda today, I will introduce myself a bit more, and we will be looking into understanding front end and back end technologies. We'll also look at the website development lifecycle and discuss next steps that you can take, actionable steps that you can take towards progressing in your career. Now, a bit more about me. I am Trevoir Williams once again from Jamaica. I attended the Northern Caribbean University, and not listed here is the fact that I attended the Columbus State University, where I did a bachelor's and then a master's of science, respectively. And in while at Northern Caribbean University, I competed in the Microsoft Imagine Cup, where I was a two-time finalist. I went to Cairo, Egypt in 2009 for the international finals, and Warsaw, Poland in 2010 for the international finals. Since graduating, I have worked at the university as well as other institutions, and I've worked in at least three different sectors: education, shipping, and logistics, as well as finance. I have taught at three tertiary universities, and most recently, I teach at VTDI, or Vocational Training Development Institute in Jamaica. I have over 10 years of experience in IT, and in more recent times, more specifically, about 3 years ago, I started creating online content through my YouTube channel and publishing courses across five other platforms across the internet. Like I said earlier, I'm not sure if I said it earlier, but I do currently reside in the Cayman Islands, and I am actively trying to retire at 40. So all donations towards my dream are welcomed. Just kidding. So today I hope to inspire you, and to spur that fire in you, I'm going to start off with a quote that I saw recently, and it says, "Just because you've never done something doesn't mean you can't start." So after today, if you were afraid to start or afraid to take the next step, I hope that you will leave this session inspired and confident in your ability to be the best that you can be. So, why are we here today? Well, today we're here to discuss what web technologies are, why it's important to get comfortable with web technologies, how we can maximize your potential as a developer and a digital entrepreneur, and how we can take advantage of a global market. There are a lot of opportunities for web developers, and I mean, it's technology, so you can use it to your advantage. With the internet and globalization, it's easier to establish a business presence in any market, in any country. And being a web developer, it's just an in demand and reusable skill that you will have, that people will always want, or you can always find practical use for. So let us start off by discussing what are web technologies. And I see that I'm kind of blocking, so let me shift a bit. There we go. So, what are web technologies? Well, web technologies are tools that facilitate communication and interaction. So, browsers and the technologies that help us to see things through our browsers, namely HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And all of them together give global reach, right? So let us spend some time understanding front-end technology. So I said browser. So everything starts off with the browser. The browser is the gateway to what is on the internet. So whether you're using your computer or your mobile phone, you are going to start off by using the browser to type in some text, some what we call web address, and then you're going to navigate to some page. These pages, no matter how fancy or complicated they look, they all come down to the three fundamental technologies: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. HTML is short for Hypertext Markup Language, and HTML allows us to author documents and we call these documents web pages, and multiple web pages create a website, right? So let's just go through that again. So HTML allows us to author the page, meaning that's where we put our text, our images, anything that we want the user to see on the page. We use HTML for that. So it's important to be comfortable with HTML. And the more HTML pages we have, or web pages, the more of them that come together, we create a website from that. So that's where everything starts. Learn HTML. Now, HTML is not going to be the most attractive, or the output of HTML by itself is not the most attractive. So your web page is not going to come out looking nice at the get go. So that's why we have CSS, or cascading style sheets. So CSS helps us to make the HTML look how we want it to look. So back in the day, HTML in its earlier versions would have facilitated you making certain style changes to the document content. So you could change the text color, you could, change the size of the image and so on. Some of that is still possible, but it is highly discouraged because they want you to use CSS to do that stuff. So you can put the text using HTML, but then you make the text blue or green or bold or big or small using CSS. Then we have JavaScript. Now, JavaScript facilitates the interactivity that you would see on the internet. So, for instance, whenever you click something and something pops up from that website, right? That is JavaScript. So, whenever you want to carry out an action based on a user's input or a user's action, then you would want to think about JavaScript to give that kind of client side interactivity. So once again, those three languages go hand in hand. HTML helps you to create the document, CSS helps you to style the document, and JavaScript helps you to control the behavior of said document. Now, one fundamental thing about being a web developer is that you have to practice. This is something that is very, very important. And it's something that's very important in anything you do in life. Like, I'm a musician, I have to practice. If I don't practice, I I'll show up on Sunday morning and I don't remember certain things, right? Or the only reason I can remember certain things is because I practice and practice, so it's becoming a part of me. So even web development and software development in general, this is something I've been doing for a while. So certain things come naturally to me. I always say practice makes permanent. I don't believe in perfection. So I don't say practice makes perfect because I don't think anybody can be perfect, but it makes permanent. The more you do something is the more it becomes a part of you. So once again, make sure you put in the practice. Now here's a more comprehensive map of Frontend Technologies, and we see that at the top we start off with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It doesn't matter how complicated your website is, what you want to do, it's all going to come down to those three: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So what I'm going to do is hide my camera a bit so that you can see everything more clearly. There we go. All right. So HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Then we have what we call frameworks. So a framework is essentially someone taking one of these languages at its most basic level. For instance, CSS, which is where we see our first framework appearing. So we take the CSS, and what happens is that during web development, there are certain things that everybody always tries to do, right? You're always going to want to make your text look nice. You're always going to want to position certain things at certain places. There are just certain standards. So what certain people did was they sat down and wrote CSS that carries out those standard things, those standard operations, and then they packaged it and called it a framework. So when you hear about Bootstrap and Tailwind and Materialize and all of those things, that's really all somebody did. They just sat down and said, for years I've been building websites, and every time I build a website, I do these 10 things. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write them one time so that the next website or the next few websites I have to do, I don't have to do it from scratch every single time. I will just reuse the code that I have written. And then they got kind and then they said, I'm going to share this with the world. So that is why you can go to getbootstrap.com and you can actually download Bootstrap, right? So that person who did Bootstrap and continues to do Bootstrap, right, writing the code actively, he shares it, or he or she or they share it with all of us so we can all use it. So that's really what those CSS frameworks are talking about. And then you have libraries, and then you have preprocessors like SAS and less. But before you look into all of those things, once again, it's important to be comfortable with CSS at the basic level so that when you upgrade, it's not because you or when you upgrade, you're not inadequate in your basic knowledge, but you're upgrading because maybe what used to take you, or now you scale up in your business. So now you have 20 websites doing, and you don't have the capacity to be writing the CSS from scratch every single time. So you are now looking for a faster way to do it, but you understand what you're doing. That is the main thing. Then we look at JavaScript. So JavaScript has been around for ages. I think JavaScript is probably as old as the internet, right? And it has gotten a bad rap over the time, but it is one of those languages that no matter how bad they try to make it out to be, no matter what wrong persons have used it to do, it is one of those languages that is a mainstay. So JavaScript has evolved because it evolved into ES6, it evolved into TypeScript. There have been several very popular frameworks framed off JavaScript, and you see their JS framework, Angular, React, and Vue, right? You also have others like Knockout. You have a number of JavaScript frameworks out there. You have libraries like jQuery, and you have charting libraries, you have Ajax libraries, you have a number of things, and it's even used for mobile development. You can see there that jQuery has mobile friendly plugins and libraries pretty much, and code, right? So my point is that JavaScript is vast, right? And it's easy to get lost in JavaScript and just go and start learning Angular. But before you can start learning Angular, you have to be comfortable with TypeScript. And before you get comfortable with TypeScript, you have to be comfortable with the fundamentals of JavaScript. So I'm just saying this to say, yes, it's easy to get excited about technologies. You hear your friends talking about it, you watch a YouTube video and they're talking about it, and you just start learning it. But without the foundation, you would just be able to do as they do, but not be able to do what you want to do afterwards. And that is the point that I hope you get to, where you can do what you want to do. If you want to do it, you can do it. If you have to do it for somebody else, you can do it. And you can flex in every situation. You don't want to be the guy who can only operate under one situation. So having the fundamentals and the foundations of these three languages is very important before you start going off into the frameworks and the more complicated and ready-made stuff. All right. Let's move on. So our next adventure has us understanding how the internet works. Now, the internet is vast, right? And it's loosely used. We just say, oh, the internet. But the internet and the World Wide Web are actually two different things, and it's important to understand the difference. The internet refers to the underlying network that the World Wide Web is hosted on. So the physical machines, really and truly, there are a number of physical machines all over the world, and they're called servers. So Amazon has servers, Google has servers, Facebook has servers, Microsoft has servers. Once you type in a website, www.something.com, you are actually talking to a server, right? So the server would get your request, whatever you type into the browser is your request. And then they say, which website or what content from the World Wide Web do I show? So your website files, those same HTML docs that you have authored alongside the CSS and JavaScript files, all of those you would package, and then you would go to a web service, a web hosting provider rather, like GoDaddy or Bluehost or HostGator to name a few. And what you do is rent a space on the internet. So you rent a space on their server, and then the rental would include an address by which people can get to your space on that server. Right? So once again, the internet refers to the servers, the physical machines, and the network that connects them. And the World Wide Web would be the content. So the images, your HTML docs, your CSS, your JavaScript, that's what the World Wide Web really is. So it's important to understand that, because after you've built the website on your machine, your next step is to put it out on the internet so people can see it. So the better understanding you have of how hosting works, of how domain name works, so that domain name is the address that you type in the browser to actually go to that space on the server. Those are very important. And it is important to know how to make your websites dynamic. So now we're going to move on to another topic, which is how to build dynamic websites and what a dynamic website is. So a dynamic website is a data-driven website, essentially. So data-driven websites, when we say that, it means that when you fill out a form and you press submit, and then you come back tomorrow, whatever you had entered in the form is still present. That is a data-driven or a dynamic website. So think about it. When you sign up with Amazon, you sign up on any website and you fill out the form, you put in your first name, your last name, your age, date of birth, etc., etc., etc. You click submit, you close your computer, and then you wake up tomorrow and then you go back on the website, you will see your information there. So that means it was stored somewhere and you could access it, you could modify it afterwards, you could remove it maybe, right? But the fact is, it is there. So that is what we call a dynamic website or a data driven website. So to get data driven or dynamic websites now, we have to start looking into what we call backend languages. So backend languages look like Node.js. So Node.js is actually like a server-side implementation of JavaScript. So once again, having the fundamentals of JavaScript is very, very important. But we also look into other ones like PHP, C Sharp, Java, Python, Ruby. You might see others. You have Golang, you have a number of languages are popping up, and each, generally speaking, they can all do the same thing, but each one is kind of using its own niche also. So it's important to, one, appreciate each one for what it can offer, and two, be proficient in at least three of them. So personally, I am proficient in three, right? I'm proficient in PHP, I'm proficient in C Sharp, and I'm proficient in JavaScript. I have never built a whole website using Java frameworks before, and I had a stint with Python and Ruby, but I don't advertise myself as a Python slash Ruby developer. So I'm not saying that you should limit yourself, but at a certain point, you are going to realize that you're going to prefer the way that certain languages do certain things. You feel more comfortable, and sometimes your career will actually shift you in a particular direction, and that's where your focus would be. So I'm just helping you to be present to your options, but at the end of the day, experiment, see what each one can do. Take one project and build it in each of these different languages and environments, and over time, you'll start to develop a preference for certain things anyway. We also have to look at supporting database connectivity. So, like I said, when you fill out the form and you click submit, your information is stored somewhere. That somewhere is called a database. So, it's important to understand how to connect to said database in order to put the information there or pull back the information after the fact. Another thing that you get out of dynamic websites or data driven websites are supporting services like emails and alerts. So, like when you fill out the form, you click submit, you might get an email saying, "Oh, thank you for registering," and so on. Those things, generally speaking, are much easier to implement when you're using backend languages. So, examples of dynamic websites would be like an e-commerce website, a learning management system, or an inventory management system, right? So once again, anything that allows you to put data in the system, come back tomorrow and see it, possibly modify it, and then remove it. Those types of systems are data-driven systems. So the next thing that we want to do is understand storage technologies. So storage technologies are databases. So database design is very, very, very fundamental, because when you get past building the static website, I know you're starting to talk about building a dynamic website or a data-driven website. You have to appreciate what kind of data you need to store, and you have to appreciate how you want to store it. So understanding those two things help to inform your decisions when you're making that database design or making that database. And you have to understand CRUD operations. So CRUD is an acronym that's short for create, read, update, delete. Once again, listen to our scenario. When we fill out the form and press submit, the data gets stored. So that means we created a record in the database. Then we come back tomorrow and then we go into the system and we look at the data. That means we have read the data. So we have the C and the R. We have created data and then we have read it or retrieved it. Then we realize, oh, I put in the wrong date of birth. I need to change that. And then I update it. That's our U. We updated our record. And then maybe I don't want the account anymore or something. I'm going to remove my account or I'm going to delete my account. That's D, delete. No matter what website, no matter what system, no matter how fancy it looks, these four operations are all it comes down to when we talk about a dynamic website. We're either putting in data, looking at the data, changing the data, or removing the data. Create, read, update, delete. So understanding how to carry out those four operations in a database and by extension while connected to a website, that is like half of your battle done right there. But one fundamental thing that you always want to make sure is that you can design the database properly. You understand how databases work in terms of SQL or relational databases versus no SQL or non-relational databases. You can appreciate which one you would use for what kind of setting. And like I said, choose the database that's best for the job. So you have a number of technologies. Certain languages fit like a glove with certain databases. At least in more recent times, a lot of these languages have become a bit more open. So, for instance, C Sharp and .NET, which are Microsoft technologies, traditionally would favor SQL Server, which is Microsoft's database server. And that makes sense, right? But then there might be a situation where you have a company that has an Oracle database or MySQL database, but you are a .NET developer and you need to build an application to interact with it. So in more recent times, they have kind of opened up the libraries and they allow you to write a .NET application that can connect to a non-Microsoft SQL Server database. Then when I say choose the right database that's best for the job, or choose the best database for the job, we have relational databases where they're very strict in terms of the structure. You have to know exactly what you're going to store before you start creating it, versus a no SQL database where the name is misleading, but basically it's not as strict with its structure. So if tomorrow the data changes, if tomorrow you have to add more data or you forgot something, you can just add it with barely any consequence. So it can scale and contract based on your demands, right? So it's much easier to do certain things. But then in the long run, one is easier to query. One being relational database is easier to query and have standard data sets from than the NoSQL is. So, I would encourage you to research those, see the best uses, see what kind of industries tend to use them or what kind of applications tend to use either, and use that to inform the project that you are going to work on or the next project you're going to work on. So let us look at our back-end technologies and frameworks chart. So here we see that we have some backend technologies, some backend languages. So I listed some of them. We have PHP, we have Node.js, we have Python, Ruby, Java, Golang, C Sharp, and then we have storage options, right? Then for PHP, you'll see that you have a number of frameworks. So you have a package manager, you have something for testing, then you have a PHP framework called Laravel, and that's one of many. That's probably the most popular one now. But you also have Yi, you have Cake PHP, you have there's another one that's eluding me right now. But there are a number of PHP frameworks out there, but Laravel is a very popular one. So if you want to learn PHP, it's good to learn the fundamentals of PHP. So it's good to learn the fundamentals of each of these languages, right? But the framework Laravel would be a good next step after learning the fundamentals of PHP. And then you have content management systems. So PHP CMS, CMS is short for content management system. Those content management systems allow you to deploy websites very quickly for clients and allow for them to manage them. So you don't have to go in and make code changes every time they want to change a sentence or change an image on a page. The content management system actually stores everything in a database, right? So like WordPress is probably the most popular content management system. Half of the internet probably runs on WordPress at this point. And what happens is that everything you do in the WordPress website, it's stored in a database. So you can actually just go and edit it. So you're literally doing CRUD on what the website is showing to people, right? You can edit it, you can remove a page, add a page. Everything is dynamic out of the box. So WordPress is a very good system to get familiar with to advance your career. Node.js has frameworks like Express, and it has a popular package manager called NPM. But Node.js, once again, is built on top of JavaScript. So understanding JavaScript is very important, and then you can transition into Node.js. We also look at Python. Python has two very popular web frameworks in Django and Flask. And then Ruby has one very popular one. I don't know if they have any other. That's really the only one I've ever heard of, which is Ruby on Rails. And then we have Java. The most popular one is Spring. Golang, that is a new upcoming language that could be interesting. I've never used it, to be honest. We have C Sharp, and the framework for that is .NET. And .NET framework gives you tools to do any kind of development you want. And when I say any, you have frameworks for web development in ASP.NET. You have frameworks for desktop development in Windows Forms development and WPF. You have mobile development in Xamarin and, as at the time of this presentation, .NET MAUI. You have tools for everything, cloud tools, everything, database development. So .NET framework is very popular. C Sharp is very popular, and a lot of enterprise level companies use those technologies because Microsoft is very standard in certain things. I'm not saying that to say that the others are lacking per se, but my career has brought me down the path mostly of C Sharp and .NET framework development. So I guess you could say I have a little bit of bias, but I'm just being very transparent, right? And then we go over to the storage technology. So Microsoft SQL Server is not listed here, but that is Microsoft's flagship SQL server or relational database product. We have other relational databases in PostgreSQL, MariaDB, MySQL, and everything on this screen actually is open source. So you can get free tools to interact with all of these languages and learn as you go along, even C Sharp and .NET, because traditionally Microsoft was always the paid one, which is why PHP and Python and Ruby would have been more popular. So now they are more facilitative of open source development and education. So it's easier to get the tools that you need to start learning with Microsoft technologies. So you see here that they have two categories for storage. Just to close on this point, we have relational databases and we have NoSQL database. And the one that they list here is MongoDB. But there are others. You have Cassandra DB, you have Couch DB, and then for Microsoft, they are promoting Azure Cosmos DB, which is more cloud based. So if you have an Xbox, right, or you've ever seen Xbox Live and so on, Xbox Live actually runs with a Azure Cosmos DB backend. So it's not SQL Server, right? So for years they had SQL Server and they did not use their own SQL Server to run that particular thing. So that's why I said always choose the best technology for the job. They looked at the relational database and saw that this is not going to be a good database for a gaming or game system or game network. Let us build a NoSQL database in technology and use that instead. So let's move on. The next thing that I want us to discuss would be APIs. So it's important to understand APIs and API design. So yes, you know front end, yes, you know back end, you know how to connect to the database. Now what happens is that an API allows you to share the functionality from your system with other systems. And I'll give you an example. If you have a Netflix account, or we all should know at least what Netflix is, right? You can access Netflix through your browser. You can access Netflix on your phone. You can access it probably on a smartwatch, right? There are a number of devices that you can use to access Netflix. What Netflix did not do was sit down and write an app for each device, because clearly you have a number of technologies and certain devices need certain languages, right? So they didn't sit down and write all of that code in the mobile app and then write all that code for the website and write all that code for the whatever other kind of app. Instead, they wrote an API in one language, one place. Of course, there that could vary, but that's some higher architectural stuff that I'll leave for another time. But let's just say they wrote an API and then they have a standard way that they now expose certain functions. So when you request a movie from whatever kind of device, all it is doing is calling an API endpoint, right? And then that API endpoint is going to respond with the movie. So that app, the web browser, the mobile phone, it doesn't have the movie stored or all the information and all the technology built into it to get the movie. It just asks the API. The API has all of the technology and all of the if statements and all the fanciness. It's all in the API. The device that you are using doesn't have it though. So all of that to say that, well, API is short for Application Programming Interface, and it allows you to expose functions to other applications. It's highly extendable. It uses standard HTTP protocols that allow you to do CRUD operations once again, and it can be used by almost any device, mobile, desktop, IoT, and others, right? So in more practical terms, if you build out an e-commerce website, a storefront, and it works, right? Your storefront works and it's all in the website. And then the customer says, oh, I need a mobile app that can do this. Then what are you going to do, right? When you already did all the work on the website, now they want a mobile app. Are you going to rebuild all of that on a mobile app? No. Instead, you would create an API that has all the functionality that the e-commerce site needs. The website would connect to the API, and when they want the mobile app, you just make the mobile app connect to the API. If they wanted a smartwatch app, the smartwatch connects to the API. And that's basically how APIs work. So I'm just going to walk you through some actionable steps for the website development lifecycle. And those steps are information gathering, planning and analysis, implementation, launch, testing, marketing, and then maintenance. So as a web developer, it's important to understand each step of the way. So for information gathering, this is where we assess what is needed for the website. We talk to our customers, we talk to the business, and we do interviews and surveys, and then this is a very critical step. So like I said, choose the right technology for the job. So it's a very critical step in us understanding what we need to build. There are certain questions you can ask as you go along. What is the purpose of the website? Is there adequate demand in the market? Because you don't want to build something that nobody's going to use. What do you hope to convey through your design? So what's the look and feel? What are general features? So those are some questions. Those are just some questions I'm sharing. Those are not all the questions, and those don't have to be the questions either. Then we have planning and analysis. So during this phase, we use the information that has been gathered and we map out what we're doing. So I always go to pen and paper because it's very important that you can visualize what you do before you start writing code. So this is a very important part, and then you share ideas with your team and then you all formulate a strategy. Then we go on to the implementation. So here's where we now start writing the code. So we start putting in our graphics, we choose the right fonts and colors and the overall layout of the website to make sure that whatever it is that we're providing to our customer, and we could be the customer too, because we could be doing this for ourselves, but whatever we're doing is aligned with what is expected. Then we go on to implementation. So after we've built it, we want to produce it. So obviously you'd want to put it on a server and look at it and make sure that it meets the requirements, right? Usually would put this through like a testing phase, a quality assurance phase, of course. Well, testing is next. So we put this on a server. We always want to optimize it, search engine optimize it to make sure that it's reachable by Google and other search engines. We also do testing. So if you have a QA team, you bring them in to, make sure that the buttons work, make sure that the images are aligned, right? If you don't have a QA team, then you would probably do more like a soft launch. So you work directly with your customer to make sure that each step of the way they are satisfied with what you're doing. So this is an iterative process, right? Because sometimes I might think that this was good, but then when I did it, I didn't like it. So, this is an iterative process. And this is where that feedback loop comes in. It's important to take feedback and not be insulted, but use the feedback to better implement what you need to implement. And then, of course, it all goes up to launch and maintenance. When you get to this point, this is where you buy your hosting, you publish it to the internet, and then, well, you have to maintain it, right? So there might be changes that are needed. Maybe certain things didn't work out as well as expected, so you have to make those changes. Um, you know, then that's just a thing. So at this point, you could actually charge your customer now for maintenance because you have to make sure the database is healthy. You have to do security patches, respond to stuff. So you gave the customer, you collected the money for that, but then month by month, you can say for the next 2 years, I will look after the website and make sure it's always up, always on, always running for X amount per month, right? Now, all of that to bring us to the conclusion, right? So every phase of the life cycle is significant, no matter how small or big the project is. So it all starts with you learning the languages, getting comfortable with your languages. I say do practice projects to, hone your skills. The more you do something, the more it becomes a part of you. And it's important to understand each of the phases that you would go through when you're actually putting the website together. So although coding is very important, and it's very important for any aspect of software development, it's important not to neglect the other steps because people skills are very important if you're going to be doing this as a career, as a business. And the website development, application development, it's a constant journey that can make that can improve every day, and it can make you better every day. So I thank you for your attention. I thank you for joining me during this presentation. I hope that you got value out of it. I hope you're inspired to go and learn something more. And like I said earlier, you can feel free to reach out to me and get connected to me through any of those networks. And I look forward to hearing from you. Take care and thank you.